Welcome to the first episode of Crucible Conversations. I'm Joshua Salnaker. I think it's important while we begin, understand what a crucible conversation is. Crucible conversation, it's a regular spiritual practice of talking with your higher self to initiate change, inspire action, and regulate your emotions. Now, by letting your inner thoughts, feelings, and discoveries flow. And I mean flow. We're able to access our higher selves wisdom, our higher selves guidance, which allows us to enter into a sacred spiral path of inner illumination, healing, and expansion. In other words, it's a spiritual modality that helps to awaken, expand, empower, and illuminate the hidden recesses of our inner selves. What does your soul have to say? Because you came here to explore your inner world, your inner kingdom, explore you. I'm excited you're here with me. Today's episode about marriage. It's about divorce, about a spiritual awakening. So marriage or divorce during a spiritual awakening. 5 tips and takeaways to avoid the inevitable divorce. Now, I'm just going to jump right to it. I'm single. I was divorced. Now I'm single. But that doesn't have to be your thing. This is my journey. And I'm here to tell you about what it's like, what I learned, what I could have avoided, what I intended to do. I'm just a guide. I'm just a dude. I'm just a regular soul like you, having a human experience. Once was married, and now I'm here talking to you. So let's run with it. Start with my number 1. So the first tip you must uncover, become aware of. The first step for me, now also, let me reiterate. All of these tips that I'm giving you are things that I eventually had to pick myself off the ground because I fell on my face so many times. This should help you eliminate some of the things that I went through to make it easier for you moving forward if this is the path that you're on. Now, a little bit of truth about me. I was married and was with my ex-wife for 10 years, literally my entire 30s. We met 2 days after I turned 30, right after my Saturn return. She's 7 days older than me, so literally we're on almost identical paths when it comes to that. We met. Many months later, we decided to make it official. Not many, it's like a handful. However, things started changing in my internal world. I started waking up. She didn't. I didn't know any of that until many years into it. But then, the first tip to help you avoid the inevitable divorce is you must identify the truth of what's really happening. You have to come to grips with the reality. You're not having a midlife crisis. This isn't something that's happening to you. This isn't just fall out of thin air. In fact, this was the plan all along. This is why you came here. Now, you also must understand that the male, female, the male, male, the female, female, whatever it is that you call your guys' selves in terms of your relationship, the intent before you came here was not to get married, get fat and happy, and live happy ever after. That's not the original plan. That's the plan that maybe society wants to sell you. That's not why you're here. The truth of what's really happening is your relationship partner, whomever that is, it's not gender specific, is meant to bring out the latent qualities that have been dormant in you for this lifetime. They're meant to be a mirror, what you have and what you don't have, what you want, what you might want. It's meant to cause friction. That's the intentional part. How else are you going to know what it is, some of the stuff that's buried deep inside of you, unless you bring it out yourself? Well, that's sure. You can just keep shoving that shit down. So that's never going to come out. But that other partner, oh yeah, they know how to trigger you. They know how to bring that shit out of you. They know how to push your buttons. That was the design. Identifying the truth of what's really happening is really all about why you came here. You are a soul having a human experience who designed your entire life before you got here. Part of that design was this phase of your life that's happening right now. And how frequency works in reality is a bit like this. And this is kind of my experience. So this may happen similar, a little bit different, however it might be with you. But I didn't know I was awakening. I didn't know I was seeing angel number stuff. I was getting intuitive hits. You know, I was going down the numerology path, the astrology path, all those things. And she wasn't into that type of stuff, but I was growing more and more into those things. And what used to be a very common bond between us was we would watch different shows together, right? She would have her show. I really didn't get a show. I had to kind of watch what she watches, but we would always have a show. At some point, those shows became uninteresting to me. Little by little, those things that used to attract the two of us, I was no longer interested. And she was looking at me sideways saying, well, whatever. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's a thing that he's going through. Maybe it's a phase. Maybe it's something else. She really didn't question it. Over time, little things like that started separating us. Eventually, I started hanging out in a different room. I started separating myself from her just because I was like, not really into what she's into right now. There was no epicenter of what happened. But I do have a quote here I want to read to you. I didn't make this up, but that encapsulates a bit of the truth of what's happening here. So I'll read it to you verbatim. Partner with no inner peace will destroy yours. A partner who avoids their own emotions will avoid yours. A partner with no stability will disrupt yours. A partner with no loyalty will question yours. A partner with no self esteem will diminish yours. And a partner with no discipline will discourage yours. And that's a lot of what kind of happened in terms of the truth of what's really happening. I was starting to work on myself. I was starting to see things. I was starting to experience things. I was waking up, and she wasn't. And In doing so, it's a bit by bit that will eventually separate the two of you. And that is by design. That's how one person can raise their frequency while the other is just doing their thing. Number one, you must identify the truth and you must come to grips with what the truth is and what's really happening. And it's hard. For me, it was really hard. I had a guide though. I worked with somebody to work through that shit. Number two, become aware of your role and the impact throughout this process and this phase. And this is it's an interesting one. Who do you want to be during this phase? Because you're changing. And when I say changing, I mean every single day could bring a different version of you to the surface, to light. You're like, holy fuck, who the hell am I today? I didn't know I had these things. I didn't know I wanted these things. I didn't know. There's a word that's out there or a phrase. It's called conscious uncoupling. And essentially, it's both two who are conscious beings that are saying, you know what? Nothing actually has happened. Like, no one cheated on each other. No one killed the other's dog. No one, there isn't a thing that happened here. But it's like, hey, should we just kind of move apart, grow apart? Conscious uncoupling only kind of works if both of them are conscious. I would assume in your situation, you're awakening and they're not. So you really can't do the conscious uncoupling. You can on your side. Conscious uncoupling, you need, it's almost like moving a couch. It's a lot easier with two people. Conscious uncoupling, same deal. Here's the thing. Do you have kids? If you have kids throughout this process, like I did, who were very aware of what was happening, we're extremely close family. We do all the stuff together. We talk to our kids about stuff. We have hard conversations with our children. So for me, the plan was never to actually get a divorce. The plan was to table it. So in this situation, she was going through school. I'm going through a spiritual awakening, and it was intense, especially this phase. And I was like, you know what? Let's just table this until you can actually, you have the ability, the capacity to explore, and we can hold space and have these types of things once you're, done with school. But your role and your impact throughout this process and phase is extremely crucial. Intention is the goal. And for me, I was all over the place. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if we're getting a divorce. I don't know if we're staying together. And I didn't know how to move forward with what do I do if I start initiating a divorce? What do I do whenever I'm trying to initiate staying together? I didn't know how to act. Therefore, I was jumpy. I was scatterbrained. I was all over the place. It wasn't until I sat down with myself and said, who do I want to be in this process? Intention is the goal. And here's what I told myself. Worst case scenario, we get a divorce and this scars my children for eternity. But what if I can be an example of how to do this in the most grounded, the most loving, in the most spiritually aware way? It was something like that. But what is that going to be for you, though? How do you want to do this? Become aware of your role and the impact throughout this process. Because if you start saying and yelling, we're getting a divorce now, your children start hearing that, how does that change the dynamic of the household? How does that energy shift? I know for me, I was working with a coach, and I was like, look, although in the back of my mind, it seems like the inevitable, I still want to see what I can do. Like, I don't want to look back and say I just threw in the towel too early. Like, I want to give this real effort, real energy, real time, real intention. Number two, become aware of your role impact throughout this process. Number three, understand the role and impact of your partner throughout this process. Who are they supposed to be? Who are they supposed to be? Now, if you answered that question, it's kind of more of a hypothetical, but if you answer that question with, well, they need to be, they're going to be who they're going to be. You have no control over that. In fact, you should ask yourself, are your projections trying to control the narrative? Do you want to win the divorce? Do you want to win saving this? Do you want to be the one that's right throughout this process? Because at the end of the day, if you're listening to this podcast, something has kickstarted, something has sparked, something has impacted your current relationship. So it's already on kind of the fritz as it is. You have a role in that. So do they. You can't control them, although you probably want to. I know I did. In fact, my projections of what was actually happening kept spewing out unsolicited. Well, you don't know what's really going on. If you would only do this, things would get better. And don't get it twisted. I absolutely tried to throw spiritual shit at her. In fact, here's the interesting thing about my situation. She introduced me to spiritual stuff. She got me interested in reincarnation. I was like, what? I was raised and born Christian and Pentecostal. So I was already on the extreme of one thing about God. She introduced me to this other stuff, introduced me to meditation. Then all of a sudden, when I started waking up, I'm like, whoa, you got me interested in this. Is you're the one avoiding, you're doing this. Guess what? She's like, I don't believe in that shit anymore. What the fuck? In the back of my mind, I was like, well, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't what you said and how you rattled my truth 7 years before this, and now you're telling me none of that shit's real. Understand the role and impact of your partner throughout this process. And here, let me simplify it as much as I can. It has nothing to do with you. In fact, you should just understand and have the awareness of it will most likely get worse before it gets better. So the question is, who do you want to be in this situation with the understanding that you know the truth of this situation? Can you sit back and just say, look, I can be the observer, but I can't try to force things. I can't try to make things happen. I can't try to control you. I can't make you see things. I can't make you feel things. I can't make you do things. And at the end of the day, The understanding should be this: I have no control over my partner throughout this process. Therefore, I should not concern myself at all with all the things that they're trying to do, trying not to do. What you should do is only focus on yourself and who you want to be during this process, during this phase, which gets me to my fourth tip. This is the meat and potatoes of really what needs to happen. And this is the thing that I actually didn't do. So the number four is communicate and set expectations with your partner. Learn to communicate the truth. And how that looks in the real world is something like this. And again, I didn't do this, but this is how I would do it if I were doing it all over again. I identified my truth and I said, look, and this is a conversation with me I had with myself. I'm trying to become the best version of me possible, which has created the awareness that I am a soul having a human experience. Therefore, my soul and my consciousness are expanding at a very rapid rate, and I'm going to be a bit different while I figure out who it is that I'm becoming. I have an idea, and I have goals, and I have a few things that I'm trying to create with intention throughout this process. But throughout this process, I'm going to be all over the fucking place. And that's okay. Doesn't have anything to do with my partner. They have their own thing going on. And I can't, that's not my shit. But what is my shit is my shit. You may not know what's going to happen throughout this phase or even the next day of those things, but that needs to be communicated. So, what I wish I would have done was I had that type of conversation with myself, really identifying my truth and understanding who I want to be and setting intentions for myself. And then I want to sit down with my partner. And I wish I would have said something similar to this: Love, something is happening inside of me that it's hard for me to communicate. There's this expansion, this knowledge stuff. Becoming more and more spiritual. I know we never went to church. We never really did that thing. But there was something pulling me to that side, not the religious side, but something on the spiritual path. As you know, become aware of, I've distanced myself from some of the things that we normally would do together. I'm isolating myself because I'm starting to meditate, do breath work, shadow work, and I'm needing more time alone because so I can work through these things. This has nothing to do with you and how I feel about you. In fact, my love for you is actually expanding on a regular basis. And that's because my love for myself, my and my true self and my whole self is starting to come out. It's starting to express itself on a more regular basis. I'm no longer in victimhood. I'm no longer in my scramble mode. I'm no longer in my feelings. And I know before we didn't talk about these things. We never talked about our emotions. We never talked about our feelings. We never talked about real deep shit. But that's the type of stuff that I'm actually moving towards. I want to talk about my feelings. I want to talk about my emotions. I want to talk about that deep seated shit that I've been pushing down since we had kids because having to be a father for the past 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And the husband in me hasn't really had a microphone to express itself. I'm not sorry of who and what this process can make me out to be, but I am sorry that you might have questions around why I'm doing this. I can't necessarily answer those questions for you, but what I can tell you is that they have nothing to do with you. This is a me thing. Now, I never had that conversation with her, but what I did do was throw some shit at her throughout the whole process. And throwing that shit was basically me trying to wake them up. And I tried. Fuck, did I try? But the reality of my communication with her was this. A few years before I started working with a spiritual coach, I talked to one and she said, in order for you to move through this process with me, you're going to have to be able to relinquish and dissolve all facets of your life, which includes your marriage, which includes everything. And if you're not willing to do that, we cannot work together. I said, nope. No, 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 no. I'm not ready to go that far. I'm ready to work on myself, but I'm not ready to completely dissolve my entire world. A few years later, I started working with an actual spiritual coach, someone like me. And she didn't have to say those things, but I knew those things were on the table. And the interesting thing now, looking back at it, me not communicating was intentional. I chose not to because I knew pretty early on it would just delay the inevitable. Who knows? Maybe things would have been different. But for me and my story, I intentionally chose not to. What do you want? What do you intend to do? So, number four, communicate and set expectations with your partner. You don't have to get a divorce. You can absolutely, like, that's not a foregone conclusion. Number five, now, all five of these are just as important as the others. There isn't one that's more important, but all five are very critical and all five are essential, or at least they were for me. So, number five, you'll need to create intention, accountability, and personal non negotiables. What is my next move? And how do I keep going? Because once you sit down with yourself and say, here's the situation, for me, my situation was this: happy life, it's happy wife, happy life. I was living for somebody else. My house was decorated with somebody else's stuff. My world was centered around other people's happiness. Hers, the kids, the family, my other parts of my family. And I can go down the list. Oh, yeah, work shit. Somewhere around 10, 11, 12, 13, 15 was me. And my personal non negotiables, I'll save some of the content for another podcast, but the number one, I have a list of non negotiables that I created, but because the situation I was in, I felt suffocated, felt that there was some sort of energy vampire in my life. I felt drained. I didn't feel empowered. Felt like I was always dragging people, things, and all the like something. So one of my personal non negotiables was only allowing people in my life that are a plus multiplier. In reality, the people I invite into my world, one plus one equals like five. Their shit, my shit together. And there's a difference between boundaries and barriers. I didn't know the difference. I let everybody take my energy. Creating intention, accountability, and personal non negotiables. What are your non negotiables moving forward? What are your non negotiables in this process? That's really what you should ask yourself. What's going to hold you accountable throughout this process? First, you need to create an intention of who you want to be. And then you need to create some sort of accountability measures that are associated with that intention. How are you going to keep yourself accountable of being that person? And what non negotiables have you identified that roll up to that accountability and that intention? How's your discipline? So, what's your next move? Who do you intend to be? Another question would be, who are you now? I was the abandoned boy. My primal question is, am I wanted? Am I good enough? Am I loved enough? Why aren't I good enough? Why aren't I loved enough? Why doesn't anybody want me? I have another quote for you. And here's the interesting thing about marriage. She and I are divorced. It's been a bit over 2 years. I talk to her almost every day. She's not waking up. She's not into this conscious stuff. She's not into spiritual stuff. She's not into healing stuff, nervous system stuff, meditation stuff, universal consciousness stuff. Not into any of that shit. In fact, our relationship has never been better. And it's a beautiful thing. There doesn't have to be drama. Doesn't have to be trauma. Doesn't have to be yelling. You don't have to pick sides. And here's a quote, and I'll give you an example of how this shows up in your real world. The hardest spiritual work is not meditation or prayer. It's catching yourself being jealous of someone you love and choosing to root for them anyways. A month ago, I met her new dude, her new man. I haven't dated anyone since she was the last person I kissed. It's been 2 years. The hardest spiritual work is watching the love of your life exit a room, exit a restaurant where you just met her new dude for the first time and shook his hand. You're leaving with the kids, she's leaving with him. First time you've ever seen her with somebody, with somebody else. You watch him walk away because this is what you do. You watch them turn to each other while they're looking at each other's eyes, walking away, and they grab the other's hand. And while they do it, they kind of bump shoulders a little bit because they've been waiting to do that for the past 2 hours, but didn't do it in front of everybody else. You used to hold her hand like that. You used to walk her out of the restaurant like that. As you continue walking behind them, you watch him open that door that used to open that door for her for 10 plus years. She now gives him that kiss right before she jumps into the passenger seat. It's not your kiss anymore. That's his. All worthwhile. You're standing there watching them. What do you do? Who do you want to be? The hardest spiritual work is not meditation or prayer. Catching yourself being jealous of someone you love and choosing to root for them anyway. Divorce is hard. Marriage is hard. Separation is hard. That whole phase, that whole thing, it's hard. I've developed a spiritual awakening curriculum. It's called Crucible 84. It's where men spend 84 days with me, creating intentional change for an intentional life. 84 days of the exploration of self. Who do you want to be? And do you know how to do that? I'm Joshua Salnaker. Welcome to my podcast, Crucible Conversations. to talk about hard things. Intentional change for an intentional life. I'll see you next time. Holla!